You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
They're fighting desperately to save themselves, and something has gone wrong. All their plans are no longer working. In the military, when things go south, we call it time to be flexible, or we call it semper gumby time. You know, always flexible. Be ready to do whatever you need to do. Because the moment you engage with the enemy, whatever plan you had no longer works. You're going to have to flex to whatever is happening.
Don't you just love it when all goes according to plan? You're preparing for guests to come over for a dinner party and every dish gets served warm and unburnt. Amazing! Well, plans are great to make, but don't often get executed perfectly. In today's message, Pastor Ken teaches that life will throw you plenty of curveballs, and the best thing you can do is rely on the Lord and stay flexible. Don't get too obsessed with the plans you create, but rather become obsessed with the plans God makes. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Nahum, chapter 2, as he begins his message, The Fall of Nineveh.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about the fall of Nineveh, and it's going to be described in great detail and all in advance. And this is amazing stuff, especially when you start looking at it and studying it. So we're going to, Lord willing, get through the whole chapter all the way to the end of verse 13. But we're in this little book called Nahum, and I've probably written more information about it than exists in the book. But remember, the book is all about the doom of Nineveh. That's all the book is about. There's nothing else in it. But that being said, chapter 1, Nahum has covered the topic of how awesome God is, because he has to remind everybody this is why Nineveh is being destroyed, and how awesome the God we love and serve is. He's also made an excursion to the end of the age in chapter 1. He's also given a lecture to Judah about their idol worship problem without mentioning it by not making it a topic, but he just starts using words that, why are you using that word when you could be using this word? And instead he's using words like Baal and Balaam and things like that kind of point to a different problem that they have. He's also paved the way for an upcoming revival that's going to take place under King Josiah, and he's made some promises to us and his people about the God we serve. So now we're in the part of chapter 2, which is all about the pending doom of Nineveh, and he's going to give us details. I mean, serious details. All in advance, 90 years in advance. The attack on Nineveh here is detailed to us, and he's written it almost like an intelligence briefing being given to a military group, because the short sentences, very pithy words, a lot of stuff in there. But it's based on, and you could call it a military intelligence briefing that he's giving us, because he's an in-person observer to the events. He's seen all of the combat operations take place. And you sit there and you read this and go, this is almost like looking at it in real time. Well, he's been there. He knows it. He sees what it is, and he's trying to describe what it is that he's seeing in the future. So, yeah, if it's not going to happen for another 90 years, so the question is Nahum a time traveler? And the answer is, yeah, kind of, sort of, maybe. But here's Nineveh, and the Tigris River actually goes right along one of the walls. And that Tigris River is going to become a problem for the city of Nineveh. In fact, as we study it, we'll find out that that river becomes something that the Lord uses to deal with the city. Now, the events that Nahum describes are ones that the surrounding nations have been looking forward to and anticipating for years, because all the nations surrounding Assyria hate them. All the nations being subjugated by them hate them. Rebellion is a problem in the empire. It's been a problem the entire time, but as we go into this, we'll find out that Assyria, the hate that they have for them, Assyria earned it, all of it. They are not nice people. The fall of Assyria is going to be a celebration for the entire region when it happens. Dr. McGee says that, based on his research, that when the Assyrians were on the march, moving on one country or another, in some communities you'd see everybody commit suicide rather than be taken by the Assyrians because of the way they were treated. They were pretty brutal, they were pretty feared, and pretty hated uniformly. Now, to emphasize the certainty of this message, though, Nahum is going to describe the battle for Nineveh. So that's what chapter 2, verses 3 to 13 is about, how they're going to lose. And the graphic picture is a reason that he builds to accept what it is he's saying about Nineveh. He's going to talk about the troops who go into Nineveh, how they're going to run around the city. That's in verses 3 to 5. He's going to talk about how the river is actually going to flood and the walls will fall because of it, and how their riches are going to be plundered and the amount of the riches. That's verses 6 to 10. Then he talks about how the people in the surrounding nations are going to mock what's left of Assyria, and it's going to be nothing. God's going to basically destroy the nation. They're going to be laid waste and nothing will be left. So the Assyrian Empire at the time that Nahum's writing stretches all the way from Egypt to somewhere just south of the Russian border. And it included portions of everything that we consider today to be Iraq, Saudi Arabia, portions of Iran, portions of Turkey, if not all of Turkey, as well as everything along the Jordan River. Everything, that was their empire. It was pretty extensive. And by the way, the folks from Israel who had been taken and put into exile by this time are somewhere in what we would call the area of Armenia today, if you were looking at a map. That's kind of where they're at. Nahum has been to the battlefield. He's seen the battlefield. He's seen the battle. And he's giving us an eyewitness report, even though it's 90 years in the future for everybody. And as with all prophets, he's been to the future. He's seen that. He's been in the divine council. He's been taken by the Lord to see this event take place. So because he's an eyewitness to the entire event, the intel that he gives us here in this briefing is excellent. It's really high quality. And the details that he relates, there are some who, as they study this book, they have difficulty with it, because if they don't believe that God can actually supernaturally take someone to the future, they don't understand how he would know these things. So there are some commentators who try to allegorize some of the things that Nahum talks about. And some of them even say, well, when he talks about the river flooding, he's talking about masses of Babylonian troops coming into the city after they break down the walls. And I'm going like, no, that's not what he's saying. Some go as far to state that even the historical evidence that we have found should be ignored because it couldn't have happened that way. And I'm going like, really? Nahum didn't get it wrong, okay? He was there, he saw it, he gives us a report. So let's join him as he reports from the walls of Nineveh. So you have to kind of look at it like he's a radio broadcaster and he's standing on the walls telling you what's going on. He starts off talking about the troops. The shields of his warriors are dyed red. The warriors are dressed in scarlet. The chariots are fitted with flashing steel when he's prepared to march, and the juniper spears are brandished. The chariots drive wildly in the streets. They rush around in the public squares, and their appearance is like torches, and they drive back and forth like lightning flashes. Then he turns to the defense. He remembers his officers. They stumble in their advance, and they hurry to the wall, and the mantlet's set up. The gates of the rivers are open. The palace sways back and forth. It's set. She is stripped. She's led away, and her slave women are sobbing like the sound of doves beating their breasts. So in this short statement, he takes you all from the beginning of Salt and the siege all the way to the end, just in a few verses. He's describing in detail what it is that he's seen. And this was given to him by Yahweh, who picked him up and said, here's what's going on. See it? And the first thing he explains to us when he talks about this army is it's not an unprofessional army. This is a professional, well-seasoned army that has fought before, and they know what they're doing. It's the Babylonians, and they're going to be fighting with the Medes and possibly some of the Scythians as well. The reddened shields, the scarlet uniforms, there's elaborate chariot decorations that are discussed. You see the spears, and they're all made of juniper, which is a high-quality wood used for spears. It lets the spear go to what it needs to be doing. You see the chariots being operated outside the walls and the operations of the chariots. This is a well-equipped professional army. They know what they're doing. This is not a group of conscripts. This is not a bunch of villagers who have rebelled. This is an army. This is a military machine, literally, that has been prepared and has been hardened from the viewpoint that they've fought other battles. This is not their first time fighting. This is a rebellion. And the Assyrian Empire has been having problems with rebellion at this point for almost a decade. But remember, that's what happened in Israel. That's why Israel went into exile. They rebelled. That's why the Assyrian military went into Judah when Hezekiah was king. They rebelled. In the lead up to the fall of Nineveh, by the way, there's only one place that's not part of the Assyrian Empire. It's called Judah, an independent nation, right in the middle of Assyria. Gee, I wonder why. The Lord took care of that problem for them. But in the lead up to the fall of Nineveh, rebellion was becoming a bigger problem for them to manage. They'd never had to deal with the level of rebellion that they were now seeing. And Babylon, who's just down the road a little bit, I mean, remember, Nineveh is towards the north central portion of what is today Iraq on the Tigris, and if you go down to the Euphrates River, heading towards the Gulf, you're going to hit what is the remains of Babylon. They're down there off the Euphrates. So they're not that far apart. Babylon is becoming a problem, and they now have a professional army. Nabopolassar made sure of that. In 616, Assyria began to lose territory to Babylon. Nabopolassar was their leader. He defeated Assyria at the Battle of Kadlinu, and they took over that whole area to the south of Nineveh in the central Euphrates area where Baghdad is today. They raided the Balika, which is that valley area there. They also raided an area which is near Kirkuk. They called it at that time Madanu. The Assyrians were able to keep that under control. In 615, they actually went further north and attacked Ashur, which is near Nineveh. At the same time, the Medes are coming from the north, and they actually attack and overrun the province called Arapa. In the following year, they moved into alliance with Babylon, and they begin to move against Nineveh. Now, there may have been Scythians who either took part in the battle or they were causing problems elsewhere. The siege may have been lifted. We don't know for sure. But Nabopolassar actually had to suppress a rebellion in the middle Euphrates area that he had captured earlier. The Ninevites would, of course, do that. And in 614, they took Ashur. It fell. And by 612 BC, the Medes and the Babylonians are knocking on the door of Nineveh. They've walked up the Tigris River from the south and from the north, and they're surrounding this area. What Nahum is doing is he's describing the approaching forces. His eyewitness description is unnerving because it's so accurate, and he's talking about events that are 90 years in advance. Again, he says these red shields. Now, why are they red? Well, it could be because they've been used in battle already and they're covered with blood. But that was also a common color being used at that point in time because it would strike fear in the other army because they wouldn't know whether or not that's blood or just paint. That's why they also wore red uniforms, and the Babylonian army was famous for wearing red. That's why when they're fighting, you couldn't tell if they were injured or not. You couldn't tell if it was the paint or if it was blood. And then we read about the detail on their metal, the metal on their chariots. The Assyrians used a chariot that actually had knives on the wheels, so they would get close enough and they could cut people's legs off using those. Well, the Babylonians learned from that and they kind of improved on it. And this also talks about the fact that there's firsthand knowledge of the invaders from previous encounters. So in other words, the Assyrians know about what Babylon's fighting tactics are. They kind of know the way they operate. And it also talks that somebody's seeing this from on high. He's taking a look at the whole battle scenario taking place. And then we see the chariot operations, because chariots were usually used in support operations in surrounding communities to kind of keep the other military out. And they would go up and down the streets trying to take care of the problems that they would have with any guerrillas or anything like that. So he even talks about that. They look like flaming torches. They're not on flames, but they're wearing red too. And they're moving quickly because they're going back and forth using the chariots and the armament on it to try and take out enemy soldiers. It's almost like tanks in modern warfare, kind of the same thing, but it's vivid and dramatic. Now, again, red, why red? The enemy can't tell if you're injured or not. That's why. So we've been given a view from the walls of Nineveh of this approaching army and what they look like approaching the gates of Nineveh. Now, included in this is a commentary on supporting combat operations. That's what we're reading about here with the chariots in the surrounding suburbs outside the city walls. And Nahum continues with his report from the walls. And we know from Ezekiel that red was the favorite color of the uniform to be worn by the Babylonian military. In Ezekiel 23:14, we read the following: "She increased in her prostitution. She saw men carved on the wall, images of the Chaldeans carved in bright red." The Chaldeans are Babylonians. That's what they wore. That was their uniform. Now remember, Assyria had spent a couple of centuries living and prospering by the sword. They ran one of the largest protection rackets in the Middle East. That's what it was, literally. Jesus had a word for Peter, who thought that maybe he could defend Jesus when he was being arrested. And it had to do with what happens to those who rely on might, the sword, rather than on the Lord. In Matthew 26:52, Jesus tells Peter, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who take hold of the sword will die by the sword." That's what's going to happen to Nineveh. They have been living by the sword. They had an opportunity to repent. They did, but then they went right back to living that way. So for Assyria and the city of Nineveh, the time to reap what they have sown has arrived. Nahum's a Jew. He hates the Assyrians. He wants to see Nineveh fall. But he's also an observer, and he also knows the history. He knows that Nineveh has lived and prospered by the sword. So now it's about to die by the sword. They're going to be on the receiving end of everything that they've done throughout the years. And it's going to happen so quickly and so suddenly, it's going to be shocking to many in the surrounding area. Now, recapping, we have detailed intel of the attacking army from somebody who's on the wall watching. We also know from the combat operations of the support forces, the chariots, we know what they're doing out in the communities around Nineveh outside the wall. Nahum's military intelligence briefing so far is top-notch. He has troop movements included, he has cavalry mentioned, and he also talks about the armaments. That's all information that you would need to know. He continues with his briefing by now talking about the defense operation. So he pivots to the defense. These are the folks who are supposed to be on the wall defending Nineveh against the Babylonians and the Scythians and the folks and the Medes. He's supposed to be talking about an active defense because Nineveh had developed what would be considered an active defense. They actually built their walls with the idea of being able to maintain a 20-year-long siege with no problems at all. But the siege only lasted 3 months. So what happened? Now, here's the problem. His description of the defense reveals that there's a problem in Nineveh. Something may have happened. Some level of surprise was achieved by the Babylonian forces because the response to what's going on is not very well thought out. And the way he explains it is kind of like they're in a panic. Something not anticipated appears to have taken place, and their entire defense plan has been thrown away. So verse 5 and 6, he remembers his officers. This is the folks in Nineveh. They stumble in their advance. They hurry to her wall, and the mantelet is set up. That's a protection to keep getting hit by rocks and stones and arrows, anything, things that could hurt you really bad. And the gates of the river are opened and the palace sways back and forth. Now with this, the focus is moving to those who are doing the attack and who are defending from that attack. The sentences are even shorter now, and they're very pointed. It's a military that's under siege, and they're fighting desperately to save themselves, and something has gone wrong. All their plans are no longer working. In the military, when things go south, we call it time to be flexible, or we call it semper gumby time. Always flexible. Be ready to do whatever you need to do. Because the moment you engage with the enemy, whatever plan you had no longer works. You're going to have to flex to whatever is happening. They've never been in this position before, by the way. The Assyrians have never been on the defensive. They've never been on the defensive in Nineveh. And they've never been surprised by the enemy like this. It's not, 185,000 of them were killed just outside of Jerusalem, but that's a totally different deal. They went to bed and half of them didn't wake up the next day. Now, if you're about to, or you've been under siege, if you're about to go under siege or you've been under siege, you've done preparations, you're ready for life under siege, you already have mantlets set up, you've got places where people can gather when they're under attack, you know where the siege engines are, you're ready for the rocks to be coming over on the catapults, you know where they're going to try and use ladders to come up. And they're ready. They were prepared for a 20-year siege. They're briefed up, they're ready to go, they're prepared, but instead what we read in Nahum's report is they are freaked out. They're panicking. The shelters are not in place. Well, why is that? The officers who are supposed to be there aren't. They're stumbling, trying to run up to their assignments. They're just not where they're supposed to be. The defense plan appears to be thrown out, and now there's an improvised defense taking place. And they're trying to make up things as they go along because they don't know they're not real sure what's going on. And the thing is when we read further, we know why. We also know that God remembers, and he's going to bring a full end to Nineveh. He talks about that. He said that back in chapter 1, verses 8 to 10. He's going to destroy them. Well, that's what's happening, and he's making sure that takes place. So the enemy has advanced on Nineveh, and they're desperately defending against the enemy. And remember, there's no relief now because something has happened, and the relief that they were receiving, where they would flip off every 12 hours and somebody else would take their spot on the wall, that's not happening now. There's no one available to back them up. There's no defense in depth, and what you're reading about here is that as they run up, they're tripping, they're falling on themselves. There's no fallback positions. And verse 6 tells us the reason why. In Nineveh, the defense is in deep trouble. They're stumbling, trying to do what they need to do. The defense is failing. And so the Assyrians have rushed their commanders and troops to the wall. And they're in a big hurry. They can't even get to it without falling. Now, what's going on? Well, these are enemy troops. They're using siege tactics and siege weapons outside the wall. We know that. It's been explained to us. But those plans that were established with that as the only threat to the defense because of what else has happened are now worthless. You see, now the enemy troops are also inside the wall. That was not supposed to happen. The wall has been breached, but not by the enemy forces and not by the siege engines. You see, God has now shown up on the battlefield.
Thanks for tuning into today's edition of the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown. Pastor Ken has been teaching us about the book of Nahum. Now, Nahum tells us about the coming fall of Assyria, a nation that oppressed its neighbors and brought violence and destruction on those who got in their way. Now, if you look at the world today, you'll see plenty of world powers exploiting smaller nations and subjecting people to slavery and oppression. What the Lord warns in the book of Nahum is that justice will come around one day. and even the mightiest of the nations of man will come crashing down like a sandcastle at high tide. God will not let brutality and oppression go on forever, because He is a God who cares for the broken and the weak. Well, if you've liked what you've heard from today's message, we'd love to invite you to visit us online at the unsafebible.com. While you're there, click on the Connect tab so that we can get to know you better. If you happen to find yourself in Hobe Sound, Florida, you can also join us in person for a service at Calvary Chapel, Martin County. You'll find information about our services on our website. You can also find a list of past messages from Pastor Ken so that you can catch up on any broadcasts you may have missed. Well, these shorter books of Scripture are just as important to us today as they were to their original audience thousands of years ago. We hope you'll join us again as Pastor Ken keeps bringing God's Word to life for us, and we continue to travel through this book we call the UnSafe Bible.